The auctioneer brought the gavel down at $320 on a cold, clear August morning in 2008 at the Williams County Pioneer Press Estate Auction outside Williston, North Dakota, and the slim man in the navy blazer, with the small pearl tie pin standing at the side of the auction tent, let out a thin, clipped laugh through his nose that turned the heads of every Bakken-oilfield mechanic standing along the chain link. Eldridge Hightower was 50, 6 feet tall and slim as a survey rod, his thinning fair brown hair combed back from a high, pale forehead, a thin, clean-shaven jaw, sharp, pale, gray-blue eyes behind small, round, gold-rimmed spectacles balanced on a long, aristocratic nose, a pale Williston desk tan. He wore a slim charcoal gray navy single-breasted blazer over a starched white French cuff dress shirt with small gold cufflinks, a slim crimson and cream silk bow tie tied at his throat, dark gray wool slacks, polished black leather Oxford dress shoes, and a small pearl tie pin on the bow tie. A leather-bound reporter's notebook sat in his right hand, and a slim oxblood cross fountain pen rode in his breast pocket. Eldridge had been publisher and editor of the Williams County Pioneer Press in Williston for 16 years, and the estate auction had been called by the newspaper's foundation for a recently deceased Bakken-oilfield contractor, whose estate had been administered through the Pioneer Press Community Trust Office. The 1972 Kenworth K100 cabover wrecker at the back of the auction list had been on the Pioneer Press inventory ledger for 17 years, and Eldridge had told the auctioneer privately the foundation would have donated the truck to the Williston Vocational Center metal shop for the cost of the diesel. The 24-year-old shop mechanic at the back of the bidder's line, in the deeply faded brown duck canvas work coat, had just outbid the foundation for $320 against Eldridge's casual $70 opening shot, and Eldridge was making sure the Bakken-oilfield mechanics understood the joke. Oscar Halverson folded the auction slip into the inside pocket of his work coat and walked through the cold cinder gravel of the Pioneer Press back lot to the truck. The Kenworth K100 was 21 feet of cab-over conventional heavy iron with the distinctive Kenworth flat-faced cab-over front and a large round chrome dry stack air cleaner canister mounted to the right side of the cab. The cab painted a faded Bakken crude black, oxidized to a chalky charcoal gray along the body panels and rust brown along the lower edges of the doors. From 17 North Dakota winters. The chrome Kenworth letters across the front of the cab grille tarnished. Both round chrome side cab fender mirrors snapped at the brackets. The original Holmes 850 wrecker boom, with a hand-cranked twin-drum winch mounted on the rear deck, listing 2 degrees right with both cables frayed, the wooden cargo deck planks rotted, 3 of the 8 tires flat, and the word junk spray-painted in flaking pump-jack red block letters across the driver's door. Oscar had grown up 2 miles south of the truck's last parking spot, on a quiet street in Williston. His grandfather, Sigvald Halverson, was waiting at the trailer. Sigvald was 78, a retired Burlington Northern Railroad section hand who had walked the B.N. Williston subdivision between Williston and Minot for 38 years, between 1951 and his retirement in 1989, 5'10", lean and erect, with broad, bony shoulders and a slight stoop, snow-white hair clipped close under a heavy charcoal wool watch cap pulled low, a thick white mustache trimmed close, deep, watery sage-gray eyes set in a North Dakota wind-weathered face, large knotted hands with pale rail-tie creosote stains in the knuckle creases. A short-stemmed briar pipe sat unlit between his teeth. He wore a heavy dark navy quilted vest over a faded barn red heavy cotton work shirt, buttoned to the throat. Dark gray heavy twill work pants held up with thick brown leather suspenders, scuffed brown leather lace-up insulated snow boots, and a plain dark brown leather belt with a worn brass buckle stamped with the small Burlington Northern logo. Sigvald set one liver-spotted hand on the rusted bumper of the K100 and stood there a long minute. He spoke quietly. He said, "Son, you bought Eivind Floberg's old K100?" Eivind Floberg had run Floberg back in recovery out of a small Quonset hut on US 2 outside Williston from 1976 until the rig down, working the steep, wet section roads above the Missouri Breaks and the muddy spring oil field haul roads above Tioga, pulling stuck Bakken-oilfield mud pump trucks off the back grades of the upper Williston Basin and overturned rig-down semis out of the wet August thunderstorms above the Yellowstone, Missouri confluence. He had built the heavy steel deck mount welding subframe himself onto the K100's rear deck in 1976 with the help of two welders from the BN Williston Roundhouse on a long Memorial Day weekend. He had married a Tioga girl named Astrid Stenseth in 1984, and they had a daughter, Maroon, born in 1985. Eivind had died in August of 1991. He had been rigging a recovery on a stuck Bakken mud pump truck at a Tioga oil field drilling pad when the mud pump's rigging gear slipped its anchor and the half-ton pump head swung down on the cable and crushed Eivind against the front of his own K100. He had died at the Williston Medical Center 2 hours later. He was 45. Maureen was 6. The K100 had been recovered by another wrecker out of Minot and parked behind the Floberg shop on US 2. Astrid had paid the Williams County property tax on the shop and the truck for 1 year until the 1992 estate settlement and the Williams County Pioneer Press Community Trust Office had taken the property and the inventory through Eldridge Hightower's foundation desk. The K100 had sat in the back of the Pioneer Press inventory lot for 17 more years until the August estate auction. Oscar had been at the auction because his grandfather had heard from a BN Williston retiree that Eivind Floberg's truck was finally being sold. They winched the K100 onto Oscar's borrowed flatbed trailer. Eldridge Hightower stood at the side of the auction tent in his slim charcoal gray navy blazer and watched, the leather-bound reporter's notebook in his right hand, and as Oscar pulled out, he called across the cinder gravel that when the boy was ready to admit defeat, the Pioneer Press Foundation would arrange disposal through proper channels for the cost of the diesel. Oscar did not answer. Sigvald climbed into the cab of the trailer truck, and they drove the 11 miles east on US 2 to Sigvald's pole barn shop behind a small white frame farmhouse on a wheat section ridge outside Williston. The dead K100 rocking behind them on the cold pavement, the home's 850 booms pointing at the cold blue August North Dakota sky like two crooked fingers. The restoration would take 17 years. Nobody knew that on the drive east. Oscar worked his day job at a heavy truck shop in Williston during the week and drove 15 minutes east on US 2 to Sigvald's pole barn every Saturday and most Sundays. They started with the cab-over tilt mechanism because Sigvald insisted the Kenworth K100 cab-over tilt mechanism had seized over 17 North Dakota winters and they freed the hydraulic ram with penetrating oil and patient leverage over 3 long weekends. They pulled the Cummins NTC 350 14-liter diesel engine out of the truck and tore it down on a stand. The bearings were salvageable, the crank true, the head needed a careful regrind. They pulled the 13-speed Road Ranger and pressed new bushings into the shift tower. The first long Dakota winter went into the engine and into stories about Eivind Floberg. Sigvald told Oscar about the night in 1985 when Eivind pulled a stuck Bakken mud pump truck out of a Missouri River bottom at minus 22 degrees and refused payment, except for a smoked whitefish from a Tioga ice fisherman. He told Oscar about the morning in 1988 when Eivind hauled a snapped Caterpillar D9 dozer out of a Williams County coulee and let the contractor pay him in 2 cords of seasoned cottonwood. He told stories about Astrid Floberg's almond cardamom kringle. The second year, they sandblasted the prairie-rusted frame down to clean steel. By the 5th year, the cab came off the tilt. In the 7th year, Sigvald slowed. He had a small stroke in February and was at the Mercy Medical Center in Williston for 14 days. He came home thinner, with a slight tremor in his left hand, but his right hand still worked. He told Oscar the truck would wait. By the 9th year, the K100 was a roller. In the 11th year, Oscar's son was born, and the work paused for a month. By the 13th year, Sigvald sat more than he stood. He worked from a folding wooden chair beside the pole barn wood stove, the heavy charcoal wool watch cap pulled low, the short-stem briar pipe between his teeth, pointing at what to do next. Through all those years, Eldridge Hightower drove past the foot of Sigvald's gravel drive on US 2, sometimes in his slim Navy Audi A6, on his way to a Bakken-oilfield community trust visit, the leather-bound reporter's notebook visible on the passenger seat through the side window. The Audi always slowed at the bottom of the drive, but never quite turned in. By the 15th year, the K100 was painted. They had wet-sanded and primed and laid down a deep, glossy Bakken-crude black that matched a faded snapshot Sigvald had of the truck from 1977, and they had masked off the driver's door with blue painter's tape around a rectangle where the flaking pump-jack red junk paint still showed through, and they had left it there. Oscar did not know why. He just left it. By the 16th year, the Holmes 850 booms were rebuilt with fresh aircraft-grade twin-drum cables. By the 17th year, the K100 was nearly whole. They had not yet pulled the large round chrome dry stack air cleaner canister off the right side of the cab for fresh element installation. The air cleaner was the last thing on the list, because Sigvald always said, you start with what makes the truck move, and you finish with what keeps the prairie dust out of her engine. On a cold, clear morning of August the 18th of the 17th year, Oscar pulled into Sigvald's pole barn with a fresh, dry stack air cleaner element and a half-inch socket. He was 42. The dark blonde at his temples had gone steady silver. The small white scar across his right thumb from a wire-feed welder in 2016 was a faint line, and his hands had the thickness of a man who had spent half his life under hoods. Sigvald was 95. He sat on his folding wooden chair beside the pole barn wood stove with a heavy plaid wool blanket over his knees. The heavy charcoal wool watch cap pulled low, the short-stem briar pipe between his teeth. Oscar unbolted the large round chrome dry stack air cleaner canister from the right side of the K100 cab and set the canister on two sawhorses at the workbench. He started to wire brush the inside of the canister for the fresh element, and he stopped. There was a small hand-welded steel pocket arc-welded to the inside of the canister wall above where the element seated, the weld bead hand-applied. Oscar set down the wire brush. He took a thin cold chisel and a small ball-peen hammer and gently cracked the weld around the small pocket. The pocket came free in his hand. He carried the pocket to the workbench under the clip-on lamp and slit the soldered seam with a heated putty knife and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in 2 layers of waxed canvas bound with brown twine, were 4 things. There was a tight roll of folded $20 bills wrapped with a piece of brown twine, 95 bills in 1980s Federal Reserve paper, totaling $1,900. There was a small brass section hand pocket compass with the engraved words Burlington Northern Railroad / Williston Subdivision / 1928 across the brass case above 3 small initials. There was a small black and white photograph mounted on stiff paperboard showing a small girl of about 3 in a heavy wool toque standing on the Williston-Burlington Northern Train Depot platform with a steam-clouded BN locomotive visible behind her. The date, October 1988, written on the back in pencil. And there was a folded single sheet of plain, yellowed lined paper, the creases brittle, the ink faded but legible. Oscar unfolded it. The handwriting was small and careful and slanted slightly to the right. The letter was dated August the 24th of 1991. It read, "To my Maureen, the cash is for whatever a young woman needs at 18 when Williston cannot hold her. The compass is your grandfather Olav's. He walked the Burlington Northern Williston subdivision as a section hand from 1928 until he retired in 1962 and gave the compass to me on my 18th birthday in 1964. The photograph is of you the morning your grandfather brought you down to the Williston Depot to see the eastbound BN Steam Special come through. I am welding this pocket inside the air cleaner canister because the Tioga mud pump rigging on the upper Williston Basin has been showing fresh fray every Friday for a month, and I do not want anything lost if the rigging slips on the next stuck pump call. The truck is yours when you are old enough to drive her without breaking her. Your father, Eivind Floberg, Williston, North Dakota, August 24th, 1991. Oscar sat on the workbench. He read the letter twice. He handed it to his grandfather, and Sigvald held it in both hands and read it once and set it down. He said quietly, "Eivind wrote this 6 days before the rigging slipped at Tioga. The girl never knew." They drove west to Williston the next Saturday. Sigvald had called a B.N. Williston retiree whose niece kept the Williston oilfield bookkeeping office records, and the niece had given them a current address for Eivind Floberg Stenseth on Front Street in downtown Williston. They drove west on US 2 under a clear, cold blue Dakota August morning and parked in front of a small clapboard storefront with a hand-painted wooden sign above the door reading Floberg Stenseth Oilfield Bookkeeping. The woman who came out of the storefront in a soft charcoal gray wool cardigan was 39. She had Eivind Floberg's broad shoulders and her father's deep sage gray eyes. She wore a soft charcoal gray wool cardigan over a faded burgundy cotton blouse, slim charcoal trousers, polished oxblood leather low-heel ankle boots, a thin silver wheat sheaf pendant on a thin silver chain at her throat, and a thin silver wedding band on her left ring finger. Sigvald spoke first. He said, "Ma'am, I knew your father. He worked on his K100 in my pole barn in 1986. My grandson here bought the Kenworth at the Pioneer Press estate auction over in Williston 17 years ago, and we have been restoring her ever since, and we found something welded inside her air cleaner canister that belongs to you." Marin's face changed. She brought them into a small bookkeeping office reading room, and they sat at a maple work table, and Oscar set the 4 items down one at a time. The cash first, then the brass compass, then the photograph. He saved the letter for last. Marin picked up the brass compass. She turned it slowly between her fingers and read the engraving across the brass case. She said her grandfather, Olaf, had walked the Burlington Northern Williston subdivision as a section hand from 1928 until 1962, that the family had been told the compass had been lost in a Minot flood in 1969, and that she had been looking through BN retiree estates for 20 years for that compass. She picked up the photograph. She held it for a long time. She read the letter twice. She did not cry until the second reading. She asked finally if she could see the truck. They drove her east to Sigvald's pole barn the next morning. Marin walked slowly around the K100 3 times in the open bay. She ran her hand along the chrome Kenworth letters across the front of the cab grill and the large round chrome dry stack air cleaner canister on the right side of the cab. She stood at the driver's door, where the flaking pump jack red junk was still masked off in blue tape. She turned to Oscar and asked the price. Oscar looked at his grandfather. Sigvald laid both hands on his knees and said, "Ma'am, the truck is yours, but not the way you mean. We are going to finish her. We are going to paint over the door so the junk is gone. And then we are going to drive her down US 2 to Williston and park her at the empty Quonset hut lot where Floberg Bakken Recovery stood until August of 1991. And we are going to paint your father's name on the door in clean white the way he had it in 1976. The boy paid $320 at auction. The truck is his on the paper. The work is his by the doing. But the name on the door belongs to your father and your grandfather, and you." They finished the K100 through that autumn. Marin drove east from her downtown bookkeeping storefront every other Sunday. On the morning of May the 2nd of the 18th year, they rolled the K100 out of Sigvald's pole barn under a clear blue Dakota sky and drove her in convoy west on US 2 to Williston and parked her facing the empty Quonset hut lot where Floberg Bakken Recovery had stood until August of 1991. Oscar handed Marin a small can of deep, crude black paint and a 1-inch brush. Marin climbed up on the running board and painted out the flaking pump jack red junk on the driver's door. She waited an hour. She opened a can of clean white lettering paint, and in her father's careful slant, she painted across the door in clean, clear letters, Floberg Bakken Recovery, established 1976. Old enough to drive her without breaking her, she stepped down. A slim Navy Audi A6 went by on US 2. Eldridge Hightower was driving. He slowed almost to a stop. He looked at the K100 at the empty Quonset hut lot with the crude black door and the clean white lettering. He looked at the 4 people on the gravel. He did not laugh. He drove on. The K100 sits on US 2 outside Williston today, and the sign on the door reads, Floberg Bakken Recovery Est. 1976. Maroon runs the oilfield bookkeeping office on Front Street in downtown Williston. The $1,900 sits in a small lockbox at her storefront. The 1928 Burlington Northern Williston Subdivision Section hand pocket compass sits beside it. The 1988 photograph is framed above her bookkeeping desk. The letter is in a small fireproof safe in her home. She reads it once a year on the 24th of August. If you ever see an old Kenworth K100 parked along US 2 outside Williston, with the words Floberg Bakken Recovery painted on the door in clean white, slow down, roll the window down, and listen. There is a story in that truck that a newspaper publisher in a charcoal gray navy blazer would have donated to the vocational center for the cost of the diesel, and the work was always for the daughter. Subscribe to Iron Hook Stories for a new story every day. Thank you for watching.